Yeah.
All right. So we're recording for external distribution. This is Richard Nikoley and me, Moritz Bierling. And let's get back to the conversation.
Oh, we lost so much. So
We're just going to talk about BBS.
Okay. So to refresh, we're talking about the original, because you said that, you know, the internet was supposed to be this big, but it's inadequate.
Mm-hmm.
But at the very start, what did people do when they first, you know, when it was not just, okay, I can, you know, log into email or something like that? Well, even before that, some of the very first thing, you know, there was Usenet. You're probably too young for Usenet. I don't know if you've ever, but that was big for me back, because it was totally Wild West, right? Anything could be posted to Usenet. And that was what I did a lot. I spent a lot of time from 1994 to about 98. And the reason I got off it, because I was getting really big and my business was starting to grow. So I was like, I couldn't take up, I had to like shut it off in order to go on. But one of the things is, back in those early days, we're talking dial-up modems, and people, they got a box, a clone box. They're running, you know, DOS, and with whatever. Actually, they didn't even need Windows. They could just run DOS, and they could run a BBS program where people could dial in, and they connected in small tribes. So you have a person, small group, connecting with, you know, a few dozen, maybe 100. And so there are tribes. These are like tribes, and they're sharing their own values. It could be anything. It could be tech. It could be social issues, whatever. And there were tons of these. And the internet came along, and this was supposed to be, this is going to like expand this. But what did it do? It took all those little points, and it collapses them all into an effort to layer. So you layer the internet, and then you layer politics, which is a branch of philosophy, right? So now, instead of being able to develop their thinking in terms of themselves as a tribe, you know, now they're inundated, right? Now they have trolls, they have attackers, right? Then you layer the state on that, right? So it has to have rules and regulations, which is fine, right? But then you layer on top of that the rent seeking, basically. You know, you have the bigger ones, the bigger tribes that grow up, and they start enforcing rules, or they make pressure and whatnot, and the bigger ones develop under that pressure. So when you're a little boy like Mark Zuckerberg, right? You see that he's too young to have really grown up in the advent of the internet. He just wanted to make a dating app for Harvard, really, basically, and it grew into this, and then rules and regulations. So now, so I have this dating app, and I don't want all of this really nasty stuff on my dating app. Facebook was, you know, Facebook, that was what Harvard's yearbook was called, I believe.
Right. Yes.
Something like that, right? And so I don't want all this interaction. So then it grows from that tribe, which for Harvard is fine, right? Have your own rules in your tribe. Have your own rules, enforce them. But then now it grows to societal levels. And we see what happens, because what it does is demolishes free association, right? The whole idea of having tribes in the first place is free association, right? And so when you freely associate, you know, one thing is fine for your tribe, it's not for another. Whoa, thanks. We have politics, government, and enforcement and monopolies, right? So that's what I was getting to when we were talking about AI. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean,
Recap as well.
yeah, you described right now pretty much the sort of development of how the internet ended up existing in its current state. And while you were talking, I was seeing definitely some things that I think come more into light when you understand how the internet is actually architected. So you have these sort of moats and sort of castles and places that people build with a little manor, right? And then the manor expands, and then they build bridges across the moat. They build walls. They build higher walls. They install guards. They install a rule set. All of that stuff that starts to develop as the particular way that this lordship is functioning well, and is starting to pull other members of the geography around them into them.
Yeah.
Right? And so happens when there's incredible agency development happening on the scale extending from the particular individual that created this order. So Mark Zuckerberg figured out a way that he could increase his own power or agency by building a system that made people orient themselves to him and to his system, because it gave them something that they want, access to the sexual marketplace. And then from that first niche, he expanded it into just general connectivity between people, and the cool kids do this, and then the people want to be connected to the cool kids, and it grows from college to college, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But this is the development that happens when the development happens on the sort of carrier level rather than on the protocol level. So because personal servers are so hard for the individual to first understand, then set up, acquire, maintain, all these, the internet grew in a direction of corporatism, of having corporations offer infrastructure that they give you access to and that they host, they maintain, they develop. And because they do so, exactly, the cloud, everything is moving to the cloud, and the cloud is nothing else than somebody else's computer, right? So when you go to Facebook, when you go to YouTube, when you use Google, you enter somebody else's territory, somebody else's cybernetic garden, or if you will. And so if you're on somebody else's territory, you have to play by the rules. Otherwise, you can't play the game they created, right?
And I have no problem with that. I have zero problem with that, except when you have an overarching government, state, lawmaking state that is for sale. They're for sale, right?
Yeah, that's right. So, and that's also the problem with the current instance of our governmental infrastructure, that we have a system that is by now more than 200 years old. We don't have rank voting, or rank choice voting. We have sort of first past the post. We have all these different systemic errors in the architecture of our governance. And so that just continues to make the systems that operate or govern our lives spin out of control further and further and further, because they're not able to adapt to the changing landscape. And the changing landscape today is the internet and the digital communications infrastructure. And so currently we have lots and lots of smaller and rapidly growing digital tribes, digitally enabled tribes, having a much faster OODA loop, OODA, observe, orient, decide, act. And so they are starting to outrun first the corporations that had a faster OODA loop than the government. And so you have different scales, right? You have the government, the largest possible scale we currently have, or then also international, UN, all that stuff. And then as you go down in scale, you have smaller and smaller systems. And because they're smaller, and because the communications infrastructure and the cost of communication is lower, they can operate much quicker and adapt much quicker.
And you said infrastructure costs as well. Yes, and that's
exactly
the cool thing about being small. You talk about the difficulty of setting up servers for your own gig. You can host everything. You host your own web. You can host your own phones, actually. know,
Right.
if you have the VPN equipment.
Yep.
You can do everything. And I did that. And I did it pretty early. I was a very early adopter. I actually, instead of having one of these, what are they? They're like old calculators. They're just a box, and the coding, the coding is in there already. It's ROM, right? It's just ROM coding in physical hardware, and it works as you have these functions, right? But I was what was it? It's very early. I'm like, no. So I found a company that made boards for an NT server. So I set up an NT server, put in PBX boards, right? And it worked for both, public PBX, and also it had also VPN. So interoffice was VPN, and later we got other equipment and we could be VPN. We went totally over the internet. I didn't even need the phone company anymore.
Right.
Well, except for, if they, to the extent they supply wiring where you can hook into the internet.
Right. But that's something that other people can offer too, or rather that is a relative, not extremely, but relatively low cost to entry to setting that kind of infrastructure up. There are actually all over the States and other places too, the sort of WISP infrastructures where people set up their own antennas, their own sort of radio towers even, and then offer infrastructure to rural, remote areas.
Yes, and I was telling you about when I lived in before we got on recording here, I was telling you how the best internet I ever had was the so-called radio internet. It's a dish, but it's not to a satellite. It's to like a mountaintop, line of sight, and then it goes right into the fiber optics. And I did that twice. I did it in Mexico, and then I did it when I was living off grid, actually in urban Bay Area. I was up in the East Hills of San Jose. I was hitting some mountain 50 miles away in the Santa Cruz Mountains with a dish this big, but it was line of sight, bam, $50 a month, unlimited, and I got the best, most reliable internet service anywhere, anytime, right? Yeah, right. So, people, everybody thinks in these grandiose terms of, well, satellites are very, very expensive, I mean, on every single level, development, launching, everything. You set up a simple dish, right? Hit a mountain, it goes into, fiber optic cable right then. And it's cheap, because the development cost of that is, I mean, it's like, a candy bar versus a Lamborghini in cost, right? So,
awesome.
these are a lot of, there's so many of these, and I know, we talked about your age, just Moritz is 26 years old, and he's been an entrepreneur for years. And I was lamenting the fact that man, I didn't even start from day one until I was 31 or 32. So I so envy him in that respect. So there's my interlude. Go ahead, Moritz.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, just for correction for the record, I have sort of acted, I think, entrepreneurially for years, but I have only actually made myself my own business for the past year or two, I would say. But yeah, definitely the mindset. Yeah, the mindset, the stance to the world, right? That definitely has been engendered in me thanks to my participation in a learning and problem-solving community called Exosphere, where that was the express purpose of convening people. You come there to undo your programming, to deprogram your hard drive, to defrag it, right? Bring it into coherence again, and then develop momentum forward. And so that can then not only express itself only in entrepreneurialism or entrepreneurship, but also in like adding value to people's lives in whatever way is available to you, right? If you are a mother, you can parent great children, if you are I don't know, even an employee, you can take on responsibility and make the lives of your coworkers easier. Like entrepreneurship to me is not only the freedom from constraint or the freedom from a boss, but also the ability to generate value wherever you go. And so sometimes I like to use the term agency instead. So it's agency development. But to sort of come back to the internet thing. So as we just, go ahead.
Let me hang you there for just a second. Agency development. So one thing I've found, and actually speaking with Noah Rivoy, a mutual friend, actually got me to thinking about this because, you know, so many things we think about in life are, you know, binary, on off. So it permeates us because, okay, you're a liberal or conservative, you're right or left, you're red pill, you're an alpha or you're a beta, you're all of this stuff, right? Not realizing that humans are very complex, and how you share things depends by individuals, groups, setting, right? You know, so you know, like maybe a guy is like the biggest, you know, hard dick alpha you can imagine when he's in his company and he's doing presentations and but then he goes home and in the bedroom he cries on his wife's shoulder. You know, something like, you know, these kinds of things where people are very multifaceted. Yeah, it mirrors pretty much everything, the push and pull, the yin and yang of society. So, you know, when we talk about agency, it's like, well, it's not that you're either a full agent or you suck, right?
That's right.
There's different levels, but there's also different facets where you are, it's like, well, how much of, you know, well, this is about what negotiation is really. So if you're like a full agent, then you walk into you go to the negotiating table and you're like, my way or the highway. Well, that's not negotiation, you know? And if you do, that's what you do if you're the Lord or the king. If people haven't persuaded you,
it's a good option to have available to you and to withdraw into when things are not going well, right? But definitely. The fucking money economy. Fucking agency act.
I like to think of agency as a scale, and when it becomes a scale, then it becomes a true weapon. It's like well, it's either a single shot revolver, or it's a semi-automatic, or it's a machine gun, depending on the situation and who I'm talking to, and what are my goals, right? What are my goals? No.
Right. So. And agency itself is made up out of multiple dimensions. So you don't only have the one spectrum that is more or less, but you also have agency, for example, in force projection or coordination or communication, or there are different verticals, if you will, of your agency that you can develop independently or also codependently or interdependently. So I like to now look at the, let me see.
One more point. So it's not only, there's vertical agency. There's also horizontal agency.
Yeah.
Okay.
Integration.
So you're going to be one kind of agent with your family. Maybe even with your extended family, like your mothers and your father and your mother and your sister and brother. There's a vertical agency to that too. You move across, right? There's an agency in terms of your own family, wife, kids, whatever. Then you move into business. There's another agency which is vertical. So it gets very, very complicated, right?
That's right. It's basically the differential trauma load or experience load, in a sense, in you in relationship to the other players in the game, right? The other agents in the arena. So if
and what are your goals? What do you want? Maybe you just want,
right.
Go ahead.
Let me see. I want to show you something here. Where is it? There. So this is a graphic I like to use recently. 1 second, resume share. Can you see this?
Just black right now. Okay.
Okay, 1 second. 1 second, I'll share again. Where is that? Well, I'll just do desktop. Can you see it now?
No, it's just black. Oh, there we go. There we go.
Okay,
Let me put on my readers here.
Sure. So this is pretty much I think it's a useful frame. I don't think it's a complete frame, but again, frames can be useful even without being high resolution or without being complete. So in this case, it's all,
well,
and then
it's interesting. You go from follower to structure and then ruler. So explain that to me.
Well, so if you start at the top, the all sort of splitting into two aspects, order and chaos, and then those split into two aspects, structure, division, and freedom and connection. And so I like to think like the next layer down is the human archetype thing. Of course, there are many different archetypes you could take, but in this particular frame, you have the structure, and that splits into the two sides of it. And neither of these is better or worse. It's just different sides of the spectrum, right? So I can, and I have been, a good ruler and a good follower in various contexts. The same is true for the warrior and the scientist, the trickster, explorer, artist, and lover. And so when you develop your capacity in those 8 verticals, I would say here, in the 4 aspects that order and chaos are made of, then you can unite them within you into sort of a meta frame or a meta capacity of the magician, being able to modulate your expression of each of these archetypes and the aspects that they are sort of cohering into according and appropriate to the context that you find yourself in. And so that's what people talk about when they say somebody's a magician, somebody's a wizard, somebody like a Jesus, or somebody who just knows how to speak the languages of life, because they can pull the appropriate hat out at the right time and then play the right role when they need to.
Yeah. Hey, no, I have to apologize. When you first popped up, I started reading from right to left. That's why I made the comment about follower, structure, ruler, and it didn't make. So now reading it top down is of course you should do. And then it's interesting. And I read your punchline, magician, the ability to access any mode or combination of models of being at will. Now, instantly something pops into my mind, and I don't know if you've seen it before, but I've shared it for years and years and years. I have a friend, Japanese guy, Yasuhiko Genku Kimura, and I often post his video about the omnicentric mind. Have you ever seen it, or what?
I've not seen it, but I can imagine what direction it goes. I should probably check it out. Yes.
So I'll shoot you a link, because what that is about is so all this development of it, but it is to begin to understand what paradigms are. And paradigms are sets of assumptions, language, the way we communicate, culture, all these different paradigms. And then, and when you're in the paradigm, everything is true. It's your paradigm. That's what's true. It's your assumption. This is, and for many people, their paradigms work really, really well. But the thing is moving on from there is to begin to separate yourself from your assumptions, from your paradigms, so that you can actually play any role. So you could enter into any of these things along the thing, right? In order to understand, and because you're separated from your own, right? Your own your own native, let's call it your native paradigm, right?
Right.
And then you become omnicentric, right? So there's no center in this. There's no one thing. There's different ways that people arrive differently through order or chaos, yin yang, to the same, ultimately the same thing by different means: follower, structure, division, freedom, connection as a higher order, and then follower, ruler, warrior, scientist, trickster, explorer, artist, lover. But everyone can get to the same level of sort of understanding, and it advances civilization.
Right.
All right, that's my saying on.
I like it.
Okay.
I like it. It also maps quite well to this idea that Jean Gebser calls, I think, a perspectival consciousness, which means that you don't have a perspective, you have sort of the perspective, or rather you have the perspective appropriate to the context in which you find yourself and that you participate in. So well,
the analogy that you use a specific idea, but the analogy that Yasuhiko uses is the cosmology of the universe, and how we went from one center, the Earth is the center, and then Ptolemy, well, no, not the Earth, but the sun. And then as you advance in cosmology, no, it's like, no, there's no real center. There's all these ways, but we have a universe, right?
Right. But
oh, you're typing. I'm watching what you type, and so is everybody else who's going to see this video. That's cool.
The thing is, there is no center as such, because everything is a center for the things around it.
That's omnicentric, right?
Right. And so you have.
So you can say there's no center, but you can say everything is a center.
Right. And both can be true in that sense. So because it depends on the context of what language is supposed to achieve in this instant, right? That's another thing. Like, language is just a provisional tool that you can use to redirect your action, to change what information you let inform your action, to make form your action. So this is something that I've also been really integrating recently, that information or language as such is not something to reify as something that has independent existence from the people that create and use it, but rather that you can play with it. You have to take it seriously, but you can play with it because, and this is something that the sort of Indo-European ethos definitely tends to be very strong in, because it was a martial culture, because there was a selection pressure in the environment for the people who best reported what was happening on the battlefield or in the raids or in the conquests, to do that in coordination with other members of their tribe, of their clan, of their pack. And those who did that best, who were best able to coordinate in those raids, they amassed fortunes and capacity and access to reproductive potential and all those things. And the people who were not able to do that, they just didn't make it back from the battlefield. And so in that high selection pressure environment, where there's low environmental affordance for survivability, you have an extreme constraint on, or limit on, what kind of social order can make it through that bottleneck, if you will.
Yeah. Hey,
so,
do you want to get back on full screen? Because I want to ask you something.
Please, of course.
Yeah, so in other activities that we had been collaborating on, you have an idea that I'm not sure whether you certainly don't celebrate feminism in its current roles, but you have an idea kind of how it may have come to be,
Right.
in terms of the centuries and centuries and centuries,
Right.
millennia almost, conflict in Europe, right? You want to explain that?
Sure. Yeah, this idea came to me in the context of an application to about men and masculinity, and in thinking it through what I could contribute to that dialogue, where the framing is how to fight feminism. I came up with this idea that feminism as a social movement developed out of the, I think, out of the brother wars, out of the European wars, or what people mostly call the world wars, that started in Europe and that then continued to pull into its wake the entire world nearly. And so in the context of that war, killing off, destroying entire generations, an entire generation and more than that, of some of the most capable agentic men, if you will, the populations that were left behind from that cataclysm were forced to, in order to sustain and to continue to reproduce, were forced to include and push even women into more roles in the society, be that in factories, be that in politics, be that in government, in all areas of life. Women were not only themselves making the move in that direction, but also being actually pulled and pushed into those directions. And
they were drafted too. They were drafted too.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. Right.
I mean, and every Western country I just saw something I didn't know. You know, in America there were Rosie the Riveters, you know, who you know, essentially assembled airplanes from the raw materials. But then there was also a lot of women who were trained as pilots, so they would ferry the aircraft from you know, and so it's funny, you only talk about P-51 Mustang pilots as men and fighters and everything, but women flew those too, and it's true. I mean, this is something you have to now. I don't think 3 black women are responsible for us going to the moon. Let me just say that right there.
It was a massive effort in distributed coordination, but yes, please continue.
Exactly. But I haven't even read the story, but apparently there was a squadron of Russian female pilots who bombed Germany, right? So they were actually in the field, combat pilots. No matter which side you're on, but women got drafted because, as you're saying, they're killing off all the men. And it's arguable that they were killing off the very best men, right? No matter what you think of the ideology of the war, you have to look at it in the context. Look, I'm fighting for the tribe, you know, whatever, but so many of them died. And so many of them never passed on their genes. So what are we left? Are we left with, so women got pushed into it and saying, okay, we'll take up these roles, dude. And to large extent, you know, genetics notwithstanding, you know, of course they're genetics, right? So, you know, we've had a rebuilding of those kind of men who would go to war. And maybe, you know, give us another 100 years and maybe we'll be back to where we started, right? But in the meantime, we're left with way too many pussy boys. Is that a fair assessment of your ideas?
I think that's one way of putting it, that will definitely shake loose some people who have a relationship to language that is has a lot of tension, and that could trigger them. And this is another thing that is something that I've been working on recently, which is this central idea of tension, right? So tension within you, tension without, when you are, as an organism, as an animal, a free animal,
Yes.
roaming around on the planes of the environment, of the social environment as well, which, by the way, is at this point a far greater field of opportunity and threat for the individual than the regular environment, thanks to the hard labor of men that have homesteaded these places and the women that have made them habitable.
Yes.
That when the environment around you affords you very little range of participation that would make you survive and thrive, then you have a selection pressure on you. And so the selection pressure on you is to figure out how to use your existing programming, your genetic programming, and express that in a way, modulate that expression in a way that you can acquire enough energy to survive and to keep away, to avoid enough threat so that you can do that long enough so that you can reproduce.
Yes.
And so you can have a genetic and otherwise legacy, because you don't only have to leave a genetic legacy as an organ, you can also leave a cultural legacy, an informational legacy.
And you can leave wealth.
That's right. Which basically is just the accumulation of agency poured into various forms of encoding of currencies, of things that make visible the flows of value, information, and resources in our collective body, if you will. And so when people are put under pressure from the environment and they have that limited range of participation with the world available to them, either they figure out through help from others or through ingenuity or just through sheer luck, if you will, or destiny, a different way of expressing that or expanding that range of participation with the world so that they can overcome the pressure on them, the momentary pressure on them. And so the task, I think, that each of us has, not only for themselves, for ourselves, but also for the people that we care about and that are around us, is to stay attuned to when within us or within other people, the pressure starts to mount to such unbearable, untenable level that they are under much stress that they either break and turn on themselves, which would be called suicide, or they break and they turn on others and they externalize the tension that they hold within them by literally harming, killing, whatever it may be. This is something that happens with school shooters, for example. School shooters are produced when a multitude of failing social systems starts to converge on one individual, and sort of in short order, multiple of these failures come together, and you have a sort of flashpoint in human, in pressures on a human that then turns them against being as such. And so school shooters tend to be from fatherless homes, tend to be under pharmaceuticals that are interacting with other pharmaceuticals, tend to be in school systems, all of those things.
Biggest thing. Pharmaceuticals. I mean, not
right. Right. It's a very powerful driver of the inability of people to bring into proper relationship all the parts of themselves such that they can act advantageously to themselves and to others. Because when we're not able to form a coherent view of all of your sensorial perceptions, you don't have a self. That's what the self is. The self is the bringing into one view, in a sense, all of the sensory data that is streaming at you, if you will. And so from that self, that integrated, that unified view of all those, you can then select and amplify various of them to be able to properly respond to things in your environment and acquire enough energy and avoid the right kind of threats. Anyways, go on.
Yes. So on the... I have another series. I have another thing to ask you, but you put it to the head of the line with the pharmaceutical. So is it fair to say that the whole, I mean, how many girls are on psychoactive drugs before even puberty? And they've gone through that hormonal rage.
Virtually all of them.
Yeah. So no females are on these drugs. They do it to boys, and so and I would guess they're either from predominantly single mother homes or single mothers with milquetoast non-men as husbands. They're essentially lesbians. So I made you laugh. I made you laugh. So to what extent is it like a single mom or or with a husband who is like what is that term? And I'm a former military guy, so I should know this. AWOL, absent without leave. Husband, just they can't deal with the formative years of a male. He's got to go out. He's got to get a bloody nose. He's got to make a bloody nose. He has to take risks, right? And this is what filters out like a lot of the stupid boys, because they take stupid risks, right? And they can't handle them or whatever. And to what extent are they like, oh, I'm just gonna put him on drugs, right? And then that doesn't really work, because here's the thing: if we had a 10 million year I'll take an observational study about men in the wilderness, not drugged versus drugged. I'm pretty sure how that's going to come out. What do you think? Nail, head, anything? You there?
Yes. I think let's sort of zoom out just a little bit so we have enough context to understand how these things come to the head that then enrages people and makes them want to lash out at each other, yes. Which is what we're seeing in general at this point between men and women, between women, other women, men and other men. Like there's all this pressure on people because roles are not clear, responsibilities are not clear. All of these things are in a massive shifting environment where you don't have enough certainty that the sand on which you're going to step and with your next step is not going to drift away. So if you zoom out a bit and look at why do we have even women and men in the first place in the biological environment, you look at what does sexual reproduction actually have as an advantage. Sexual reproduction has an advantage over asexual reproduction in the sense that it varies the genetics of the participants involved enough that you have higher variation to be able to respond to a stronger pressure on organisms to evolve and adapt to changing circumstances. And
exactly.
So we have men and women because that allows us to vary that genetic code quickly enough to generate new people that can mix it up, and that we can generate enough of them that some people will fail to reproduce and will fail to adapt to the existing or new pressures, and others give rise to new ones, and that's just the progression of evolution. Quick interlude here. People tend to overemphasize the selection part of evolution, which is only one side of the equation. There's the other side of the equation, which is the generation part of evolution, which is sort of this generativity, this creating newness. And so one part where, for example, the Nazis went wrong when the first awareness and appreciation of that being a dynamic in the environment at all started to permeate the public consciousness, that people superimposed on that awareness their own disposition to express their own innate drives. So men tend to be more on the acting upon others in a strong, forceful, order-establishing manner, which is not to say that women cannot do that or don't tend to do that, but there are simply differences in how much men and women tendentially engage in these activities. And because we have different reproductive roles in the cycle, men tend to emphasize the going out and taking risks part of the equation, and women tend to emphasize the avoiding threat and sort of making sure that everybody is taken care of part of the equation, not because women couldn't do the one thing or the other, or men couldn't do the one thing or the other, but because if a group of people, if a tribe flips and reverses this role distinction, that women are the ones taking risks and men stay at home, then they tend to not be as successful in reproducing fast enough and varying genetic code fast enough and having enough population to outcompete in our evolutionary history, when we're still competing a lot, the other tribes that were doing the regular thing, right? So with this context, I think we can now drill down into how we end up with the current situation, which is that in those wars, we had a massive culling of a large part of the population, the male population especially, over and above the female population in all of these countries that participate in the war. And so as a result, with women in a differential sense having more agency, more power to express in the social hierarchy as a result of that culling of these men, we generated what is now called a feminist movement of arguing for and fighting for inclusion in the franchise, wanting to have access to reproductive rights, or the pill, for example. And that's, by the way, another point that I want to make with the pharmaceuticals. Yes, men and young boys are extremely are extremely using pharmaceuticals, or being made to use pharmaceuticals, mostly for ADHD, but what is called ADHD, which just means that men require, or these people with ADHD require, far higher levels of stimulation to be able to function well, which doesn't mean that they're not able to focus, but it means that the school system and the education system we currently have is not serving them.
It's not, that's perfect. That's a great point. That's a great point. I'm going to write that down if you don't. Right. That is a great point. It's like, okay, school is school, right? This is why a lot of people homeschool and do private schools. It's okay. You've come into, it's like just an analogy off the top of my head. All right, you've come to McDonald's. We don't serve ribeye steaks here,
right? But
the kid needs a ribeye steak, right?
Right.
So it's like, okay, we're gonna give him a kitty box, but we'll lace it with some drugs so he thinks it's a ribeye steak, or he just doesn't care, but he needs the steak, right? And I'm not talking about anything diet here. I'm just using
sure.
Right. So if you're a vegan, you can continue watching. But that's just a really good point. And I've kind of looked at, public versus private versus homeschooling versus, if you have enough money, personal tutoring education, as kind of a spectrum of philosophical difference and values. But what if we looked at it more, especially for young men, for young boys, so particular, so critical that, you've got a whole industry, and of course the drug industry is on board, and they actually lobby to use these drugs. Can you imagine that, right? And they say, and I'm amazed that we got off on this tangent from where we started, but can you imagine? It's like, okay, basically you're saying, boys, young kids are a pain in the ass. Let's just put them on drugs.
It's an abdication of responsibility. That's what it is.
It is an abdication of responsibility, but more worse than that. It's what it is. It's like, okay, we're going to choose our social structure, our good. So, I lived in France for a couple of years, and I was this is early 90s, long time ago, but I was on a French ship, and the French guys would tell me, le système plus développé du monde, right? Which means the most developed social system in the world, right? And I'm not pointing, I don't know that they drug their kids too. What I'm saying is that this sort of idea that our social system is so great, we have, one size fits, and we can't even tolerate young boys anymore. Put them on drugs. Yeah.
Yep. And
Weird,
the thing
we got off on this tangent, Maurice.
Well, the thing is, it's not only that young boys are being put on drugs, which primarily is for ADHD, or what people call ADHD, which, by the way, is just a name that some people who call themselves psychiatrists or therapists make up to
call it something.
Yeah, to basically have a protocol that can be distributed fast enough to everybody in the country, so people can point to it, say, this is what you have, and now let me give you drugs, right? Yeah. So it basically just means having a need for high stimulation, which would be pretty easy to provide if we just let them play outside, or were able to do that.
There's this one woman who's pretty prominent now, and she has I think she calls her movement free range kids. And man, when I was growing up, I was living on 10 acres along the Truckee River in Reno, Nevada.
There was no need for that term.
What? Yeah.
There was no need for that term.
And on summer vacation, we're talking 60s and 70s here. On summer vacation, my mom would see me, and I was wearing cutoff jeans, 10 acres along the river, right? And there were girls around too. And, once I hit about 10 years old, so summertime was like, bye, Mom. And, they wouldn't see us till almost sundown. They had no idea what we're doing, right? We're swimming in the river, jumping, doing risky things in terms of swimming. But back then, us kids knew how to swim by the time we were, 4 or 5 years old, right?
Right.
I'm half aquatic, actually. So I love the water. Yeah. My mom, I got it from my mom. My mom is like crazy,
Right.
I don't want to go on. So
it's good. It's good. I'll just finish this point up. So with boys being drugged mostly for so-called ADHD, for high stimulation needs, women are also, or girls, and then as they grow into women, are also being drugged, or are taking drugs at the recommendation of people that have a high enough status in society that they can command others without fear of reprisal from the legal system, right? Which is what doctors do. And so women take, when they enter puberty, they start to take the pill. They start to take a hormonal tool, something that changes the hormonal system in them, and that then has an effect on their moods, on their capacity to focus, on the way they show up to people around them. And so virtually all women that are sexually active take the pill. And so the thing is not that people then go off and have this idea, oh, now let's forbid the pill, or all these things, but rather the thing is, the pill is a chemical device. You can use a chemical device to achieve certain ends. Often though, we end up with using chemicals, pharmaceuticals, pills, interventions, if we fail to pull the capacity into ourselves, into us as people, and into the social systems we participate in, to keep ourselves healthy, well, and protect ourselves against threats. So why do we have so many sexually active women that also take the pill? Well, that's a large question to be explored. Well, I would say also, again, the sort of single mother household thing, and not having enough, for a large portion, not having enough examples of joyful, agentic, responsible expressions of masculinity in their environment, that they would be looking for men that demonstrate those traits. And so especially also in times of change, which we are in, where lots of things are changing very quickly, females of any species, not even just humans, tend to choose the ones that demonstrate the highest aggression, so as to maximize the probability of their offspring to survive. And so basically, again, it's another expression of our failure on a societal, large-scale level to operate our social systems well enough that the selection for the types of men and women that are going to reproduce fall along lines that are sort of agreeable with our moral intuitions. Anyways, go on.
Well, you know, you use the I think you use the term I don't know, moral abdication or abdication of responsibility, right? So to, you know, I never thought, you know, I grew up as a religious person and kind of spurned Catholicism and everything, but if I come full circle back to that, I at least can say I understand their logic now. Now I don't, but the problem is in the last few decades, you know, they don't push back much against Western countries using contraception, but then all the third worlds will you know, listen to them, right? So, and I wonder if that's really more their agenda, right? Because they should be. It seems to me that they should be advancing this message, at least in their own terms, generally. But I think on a more like loving level, a love of humanity, a love of society, a love of what they had a role in creating. No, they're not clean and everything. There's a lot of atrocities, but they have generally been very pro-family and helped to keep the families that build civilization together. So, right. You know, I'm getting older and wiser on this, and I don't like to anymore just say, that's fun, you know, it's all based on fantasy and everything like that. I prefer to look at it for, well, what are they trying to achieve? And I'm very hyper pro civilization. So the other point,
pro people.
Well, I want see the problem is that, you know, you've seen the film Idiocracy, I'm sure. So that's I'm sure you've seen that, right? Where, you know, all the smart people quit reproducing and what you come out with is like an idiocracy. So the other big red flag to me, I mean, huge red flag, and I hadn't thought about this before in terms of like birth control for one. I mean, really, unless you're going to kill a man's ability to get it up, which that's birth control, right? Unless you're going to do that,
they're working on it.
They're working on it, right? So they'll take that drug, but then take Viagra to make a synthetic erection so that they can have the pleasure. To
substitute something that you have outside of yourself for something you could just pull into yourself, but that will require your capacity to like build yourself up, to build your agency again, right? So we use external tools. Yeah, we use external tools when we don't know how to do something ourselves, or when it extends our agency into sort of further crevices or parts of the world that we can't actually reach by our limited human nature. So this is the case for pharmaceuticals, it's the case for technology, it's the case for other people. And so oftentimes you can find sort of failures to build people up, build their agency up into levels where they can start to solve more problems than they're generating by looking at what are the tools that they're using in lieu of incapacitating themselves or each other. And so when you look at pharmaceuticals, that's basically an admission that we haven't yet figured out on the collective level how to help people regulate their own urges, their own desires, their own expressions of those urges sufficiently that they don't go into dangerous environments or dangerous have sort of dangerous experiences that endanger their integrity, and so that we have to prevent or make less dangerous through the use of numbness, through the use of like pharmaceuticals, through the use of keeping people away from risk rather than helping encourage them to deal with risk in an appropriate, aware, and responsible manner.
Excellent, because I was going to start off by saying, men, if they do have the male pill, they get a male pill that just gives you a limp one, right? Males have always had the ability to put a strap on, right? if they want to do that. But the bigger issue is that in the same way that we talked about, drugging boys, and it's been a far longer time that girls have been drugged because, I don't know, for what other lack of responsibility abdication that people have wanted the pill. I mean, how far does the pill go back? It must go back to at least the 60s. Yeah. Right. And so
let's take it back here again. Like we basically arrive at the large scale drugging of young boys because, or there at least was a contributing factor in the unavailability of enough positive, responsible male masculine role models available in the society that could help translate and guide the expression of young boys' aggression and masculinity into appropriate forms, right? Rather than forms that are inherently harming themselves or harming others. And so when you don't have that around, you have to substitute for that with a lower grade, lower resolution, worse technical solution, rather than the taking that capacity and pulling it into the source code of yourself, the culture, the personal habits that you have.
Yes. And well, there's also, we ought to make one distinction between talking about the young boys and the girls. Boys are getting these drugs prepubescent, before they've had a full spectrum of hormonal rage. Not hormonal, but I mean a rage of hormones, you know. And with the girls, it's post-pubescent. Obviously, that's its purpose, because now we're trying to socially manage the raw ramifications of when a girl is sexually fertile, right? So in a sense, so back when, back when it was, who knows, when it was hunter-gatherer, as soon as she's ready, like I like the saying, if there's grass on the field, play ball. And we've actually we've done several things. There's social policy now where, and I don't like the idea of forcing, 13-year-old girls into marriage or anything like that. But I very much dislike the idea that two kids of roughly, she's 13, he's 15 or 16, and there's social policy now against that. In fact, they can't even text each other photos. It's child pornography. Stuff like this is
it's another failure. It's another failure to help build up the capacity in the boys and the girls that grow up in our society to responsibly manage their own exploration of their sexuality and the expression of it, right?
Yes, exactly. In the terms of the young boys, you wouldn't imagine they would have to be on their psycho drugs forever, right? And probably I would guess in many cases it resolves after puberty, but who knows what the damage was before that and how they would be different had you just done your job. So with the girls, you had social structures, because, you know, society and whatever, and however society decided, whatever, or churches, whatever, it's like, no, we don't want the girls having kids at 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, you know, and we think 18 on is a better thing. So they had social structures in place to prevent that. You set up a wall, build a wall, right? You know,
right. You build external walls when you are not able to manage the internal walls. That's right.
Right. And so, but then abdication of responsibility. So then it's like, oh, let's just put them on the pill, right? And we don't have to worry about it. And the thing is, unlike with the boys, it can be a chronic thing, because then she hadn't learned the value of waiting and like anticipating having a child.
Or rather, not only that, but like also filtering out and vetting, doing due diligence against the people that you let into the most intimate part of yourself, right? And so
because if pregnancy is no worry for us parents, right, then who cares who she's hooking up with, right? It's not, and maybe it's not a good man, not going to be a good father. Well, at least she's not going to get pregnant. I'm sure that's rather extreme. I think most parents do care about who they're, but this affects everyone's perception when you're not dealing with the real responsibilities that happen.
Well, and you're also not paying the full costs of something, or rather the costs of a mistake are being artificially driven down. And so when that happens, there is less of a pressure on having people do the right thing, right?
Well, that's part of why we have all of the social programs now, because look, you don't even have to worry about it that much, because we'll offer you this and this and this and this and this. Just don't worry about it. Do not celebrate human traditional values. Don't worry about it, because we're Democrats and we need you as voters.
Sure, and we are Republicans and we need you as voters, and so that's why we rah to be able to rally you. So all of this is a again, always comes back to what are the ways that we collectively encode the shared reference set we all point to inform our actions in the context of the social spheres we participate in. And as we've grown in scale, as being able to manage larger and larger scales of collective society, of collective coherence, if you will, one rule set or one good way of working with each other, we have had to rely on increasingly strong bonding mechanisms, if you will. And of course, there are three methods of coercion that we have available to us, three methods of moving people. One of them is remuneration, which is basically giving people something they want in exchange for what you want them to do, which is just trade, which is paying people, which is jobs, all that stuff. The other
it's also paying them to not do wrong. Like I think Kurt Doolittle's idea, which I'd never thought of this before, but one good form of one interesting, instead of giving them a pill, pay them to not have kids.
Right. Or rather,
talking about the low class. Right.
Yeah. So there are many different ways, three different ways. So fundamentally, that you can move people, you can entice them to move, and of course, the more people know how to move themselves, the less they are amenable to being moved by others over and above the values, the standards they set for their lives, right? And so when you don't have a standard of your life, and when you don't hold yourself to that standard, and when you don't have the capacity to increase your range of participation with the world, the skills you have available, the agency you can express in the world, you will take whatever deal you are given. And so again, when we start talking about giving everybody a free income, which is just one form of wealth, by the way,
Yeah.
this universal basic income discussion is a discussion of, let's reduce the way we support people in one dimension, onto one dimension of how we can support them, which is money. Which is basically an admission of, we failed in all of these ways to build a society that builds people up to the basic level of agency, that they can take care mostly of themselves and of the people that they are responsible for.
Amen. Preach it, brother. I love that.
And by the way, this is not a failure of any particular political party or of any particular movement or of any particular class even. It's a failure collectively to maintain agency, as the scale of our agency extension and expression has grown massively. And as we've basically now homesteaded virtually the entirety of the planet and have come up against the limits of the environment that is able to support us if we continue with the ways we externalize costs on the foundations of what makes our life possible at all. And so what people don't realize is the environmental discussion often takes place in the context of climate change or global warming, or of these discussions that point to something valuable, which is we have effects on the world around us. That is undeniable. Those effects can be better or worse. They can be beneficial, they can be deteriorating. And so the task of life in the universe, or rather what it looks like, what life is doing, is pulling more of inanimate matter into animate matter, basically providing on our planet more surface area for more of life to emerge. That's what trees do, that's what animals do, that's what we do. That's basically how the evolution of complexity of life on Earth has progressed. As we have this massive energy source in the sky, blasting this chemical rock.
Oh yeah,
with lots of energy.
You mean the discounted thing, the thing that doesn't really factor in that much, because humans are so much bigger than the power of the sun. Continue.
Right. So that's sort of a very large scale zoom out, 10,000 foot or millions of feet view. But zooming back in again, so as life has progressed to the stage, and as we as humans in the last millions of years have sort of distinguished ourselves from other animals in the sense that the level of complexity that is within ourselves has become greater and greater and greater than the level of complexity around us. Not only on the individual level, but also on the collective level. We can basically take experiences that we have from the things we walk through, we participate with in life around us, and encode them, right? That's what happens in your brain when your neurons start to form pathways between each other and integrate into a coherent structure that allows you to hold a lot of complexity in a very dense, compact space and draw on that encoded experience to inform your action to acquire more energy than you consume. That's what life does, right? And so with us humans now, having distinguished ourselves from hominids by way of figuring out how we can have collective encodings, not only individual encodings, which is basically language, rituals, signs, writing, all of these different ways that we externalize the tensions we hold within ourselves, the encodings we have within ourselves, onto the environment, and then can substitute our internal stimulus response pathways with or mechanisms with the encodings that we have created outside of ourselves. And so collectives can start to scale beyond the sort of small hunter-gatherer bands when they have shared reference sets, shared rules that they can point to collectively and have collectively inform the norms by which they live, which allow them to survive in the geography that they live in. And so those reference sets can have higher resolution or lower resolution. And so as you have very low resolution reference sets, you can only scale so far, because as you scale beyond that, you cannot quickly enough point to them to collectively move forward and make a decision and appropriately react to the changes in the environment. And so we are now sort of at the tail end of a massive move throughout history. History, by the way, another encoding, a shared encoding that we refer to inform our actions, of figuring out how to increase the level of resolution, the fidelity of the information that we collectively are able to reference in order to inform our actions in each context and on infinitesimally smaller timescales. And so people can do that on the individual level, for example, by journaling, meditating, walking, engaging in contemplative practices, stoicism, the way of not exactly controlling your mind, but bringing all the parts of your mind and your body in proper relationship to each other, such that they act with integrity rather than being disintegrated. And then when you have that capacity, which happens through also very social process, not only by you withdrawing from everything around you, although that can be contributing, facilitating that thing where you have sort of the pressure on you to self-structure internally outside of the tribe, which is what shamans used to do, which is why they were also able to sort of become the magicians that they became. You can then go back into the social arena and start to take the structure you built up in yourself and start to pull others into that way of thinking, that way of being, and not only then do that in your one-to-one interactions, but do that in other ways of encoding that structure that is high resolution enough that people can point to it and let it inform their actions even when you're not there. And so that is what we're currently in the process of building up in the internet as the highest resolution, the strongest level of encoding that is available to the smallest unit, which is the individual, or as I have started calling us, dividuals, because we are actually divisible, we just don't like to be divided. And then also to refer to that collectively and maintain the integrity of the information at each expanding scale. And so that's basically why I have this interest also in the crypto space, the cryptography and cryptocurrency and these blockchain spaces, because they have taken the computing stack and the way we structure our collective encodings from one of server and client architecture, where somebody holds the power to change the collective encodings that you have here and make the people who are referring to that be derivative of that, and so have sort of be informed by that. And so there's an imbalance in the power relationship between the people who control that data set, the database, and the people who access it and use it. And so the crypto space gives us the promise of taking data integrity, how data is assured to be the same through time and as it moves through people or through devices, and bring that down from one server that one company controls down to, okay, now we have many different servers that all share the same collective reference set, which is what blockchain is. Mm-hmm. And now the next step in that is holochain, which is basically hash chains, how you can have collective encodings that start as an individual encoding in a shared rule engine that can then maintain the data integrity at each step as it moves out to more people and through time. And so that is the kind of encoding we need to be able to guarantee mutual sovereignty, right? Mutual sovereignty, how the collective cannot hold the individual hostage, nor the individual can hold the collective hostage. And so as we build this out, we will start to see more and more collectives be able to share the same reference set and to find common themselves and others, and to also bridge between the shared reference sets that they have available to them to other reference sets. And so that's sort of the infrastructure that we're currently in the process of shifting to on the global scale. And it basically is the direction that we need to move in order to have the currently failing social systems that are failing because they have insufficient collectively held data integrity of the shared reference sets onto that substrate. Anyways, that was a lot of big words and a lot of big...
it's very funny. It's very funny. Before you started on that, I thought you were just wrapping up our social thing, and I'd written down a question here to kind of wrap it up. And, this really didn't start out as an interview. It started out as a conversation, but kind of turned into one, because you have a lot of information there. But what I wrote down was, okay, all of these social issues and problems that we've discussed, what's the tech? And I thought you were just going to wrap up your socially, and you go into a whole tech. So I don't need to answer that question anymore. How serendipitous. I love serendipity.
Yes, I do want to add one last piece here, which we actually started out with when we started recording, which is the AI piece. And just to give people understanding of how the conversation that currently is generated and maintained about AI, not only in the tech circles, but also in the broader public through the use of media and journalism that is very dystopic, as well as through the use of entertainment media like Hollywood movies.
Exactly.
Very dystopic.
But we love, we love the dystopia and we love the zombie, right? So there's
there's a pointer to you what kind of relationship people have to other people. They relate to other people as zombies or as sort of these AI gods, right?
Right.
So to finish that off, the AI conversation and the image of AI as a secular god has come about, I think, because of the internet's growth into the sort of corporate feudalist structure that has existed, that has come to be this way because we haven't had from the start the ability to maintain data integrity with each single data entry and guarantee that on the individual, the smallest level. And so the selection pressure on the infrastructure was such that we have companies offer the infrastructure and build it for us, charge us access and maintain sovereignty over it and all these things. And so the people that own, fund, operate and maintain the infrastructure that we use collectively to communicate, they create it in a particular way. They build an ontology that data gets formed into. It's a one way of structuring that data generation rather than a distributed, massive, exploratory, experimental way of structuring that then can grow and shrink and grow and shrink again. And then the agency gets extended virtually only exclusively and primarily. One second.
Just a second. Okay, because I want to accentuate that distinction you made.
Yes.
In terms of data, in terms of data, AI, and now blockchain or holochain, whatever. I was not bad at coding way back when. And I'm talking the old languages, COBOL, BASIC, Pascal, COBOL, Fortran, stuff like that. It wasn't bad. But when I started business, I found out I was pretty good at databases because databases are easy. They're very easy. All you have to do is form a table, get all this data. You can build whatever queries and forms you want, right? And so then you say, well, I have this, you build a resource. Actually, it becomes valuable. Well, in a company, that database is valued to me. You keep hitting up the customers, then with these collective databases, right, but it's dumb, it's not smart. And we're seeing, I think, the breakdown of the idea of databases, right? All it is to make money. So continue.
Yes. So exactly. So as we have the capacity to, because what is a database? The database is a relational way of putting data into a shared space, right? Like you put basically a matrix there, and then, okay, this cell has this data, this cell has this data, etc. And then you can run transformations and algorithms on all this data. And so we now have these massive databases of massive troves of data that individual people on a collective scale of Facebook, multiple billions of people generate each day, that the people who run this infrastructure can run algorithms on, can do machine learning on, can do so-called AI, artificial intelligence on. And that's where this sort of, this driver of the fear of the AI god comes from, because we have massive relational data that's very rich, lots of meaning baked into it, but it is only available to the people who run a structure, and only they have the means and the capacity to make that information, that data, inform their own actions inform the way they extend their agency and the agency of the people that they care about, and the agency of the people that they have to care about in order to continue to do what they're doing, which is politicians too. And so when we bring the data integrity down to the lowest level of the individual entry in a iterative chain of entries, which is a hash chain, which is what holochain is built out of, and then we add the capacity to keep that data set available in a shared setting through the use of a DHT, a distributed hash table, we give ourselves on the individual and the collective scale the capacity to generate warm, rich, meaningful data first for ourselves in all the different ways that we architected people in an open source framework. And then we can use that to have each of these experiments in game rules, grow to reach out into the social sphere and find the appropriate limit within which they're applicable. And so then we start to have a Cambrian explosion of social organisms, of rule sets, of game engines, basically, of how people can relate to each other and what reference sets they want to be able to reference collectively to inform their actions. And so it is that promise, I think, that this whole technology has. And with that, then the direction of us moving, the AI question becomes kind of moot, because then it just becomes, how can we add intelligent extensions of our individual and collective agency to the system, to this way of structuring information. And so then AI doesn't become AI anymore, it becomes interstitial intelligence, as in the connective tissue that allows us to do things better that we want to do with ourselves and with each other. Or, and this is something that I think people don't realize, but any kind of intelligence is always a property of a collective of wholes, a whole of wholes. So you, right now looking at the screen, watching us talk, you are a whole of wholes. You are a member with your skin that holds together your organs, your cells, your trillions of cells that have no way of coordinating other than in the context that each of these cells exist in. And so there's no CEO cell, there's no central database, there's no one place where all of the information gets stored, although there are different levels of complexity where the data is stored. So to finish this off, collective intelligence is what AI has to grow into in order to become actuated. And so we have to figure out how to change the conversation about intelligence from one of something that one person can imagine and then pull other people into the engineering of, into how can we, in our own whole of wholes, and then as part of a larger whole of wholes, which are groups, exhibit intelligence. So it is about bringing into a relationship, proper relationship, all the parts of yourself so that you can become more intelligent and agentic, which I think is a sort of side dimension. It's not the same thing. And then also how to let that intelligence grow in scale through the use of technology and other people for yourself. And then also, once you have smart, intelligent, agentic people, that they come together, then to have that as on a group level as well. And then not only on one small group level, but on expanding scales. And that's the way that we reshuffle the entire social order to orient itself around mutual sovereignty rather than complete and utter violations of sovereignty at every single scale.
So you're trying to create, if I can put it into my own, what I got from that, which I love, by the way, and I have more to say. I just want to, I want to.
We can have another conversation at some point.
No, but what I'm saying is that you were literally, to me, I don't know, literally. I hate the word literally, but unless it's really literal, like I'm literally looking at the window right now, So, but it seems to me that you're trying, and Bitcoin and blockchain was a good start. Who knows how good that will be, but it was great because something like that is great because ultimately very very few of first movers end up being the real successes because they look at but you have to start somewhere. So you don't say, well, this is crap, we're going to do this.
Bitcoin is the grandfather of this revolution.
It's wow. I've learned this, but let's innovate this. But
that's right.
To me, what you're talking about in all these integrations, and I love the word integration. I've been using it forever, right? Because I am a guy who likes to integrate everything, and I guess I could say exagrate. When I put it out there, I like to be as honest as I possibly can, right? This is like how I see it, blah, blah, blah. But then it becomes a Hegelian dialect, right? Because then so I get all of these disparate syntheses, right? And then I do, I can antithesize with all of them.
You do recursive disambiguation.
Yes, disambiguation, and then I'm a synthesizer. I call myself a dot connector and synthesizer. Right. So I like to take all these things, and then I put it out there as, my synthesis of things, and then that becomes hopefully somewhat of a synthesis or a new thesis, and then rinse, wash, repeat.
Right.
But so that's why I love integration. And so ideologies and tribes, and that's why we talked about the omnicentric, no center, everything. Don't be a take it all in, right? Now, just make yourself a little bit better center than you were yesterday.
Right.
I like to say that I don't strive to be right. I just strive to be a little bit less wrong.
Yes.
So this thing really, how you ended this, really, you're trying to synthesize. This is a big idea. You're trying to synthesize a new human metaphysics, really.
That's right.
The foundation of where you are, and it's
a way of orienting yourself to the world.
Yes. And so here's a question, though, I have for you. So what I got from that is that rather than a big central database run by a company, every individual can create their own database. And they have their own database. It is, in simple terms, it's the story of your life. You add data as you wish. Now, as you add data to that, right? And it could be, now you could open up, you say, add everything. But then you can set the parameters of who gets to view it, right? So you have your own dating app. Okay, only chicks that meet this. You could have your own. Company app. You could have multiple company apps. Okay, someone who wants this, they see this.
That's the way that it is moving into, by the way. Yeah, that's the way that the whole architecture of the internet is moving into the microservices paradigm. And that's also what Holochain enables, which is how to, all the applications we're currently using are not actually applications, they are meta applications. They are interfaces that aggregate a whole range of functionalities into one coherent view so that we, as normal animals, can deal with the reams of data coming at us and can use the data to do the things we want to do. But the actual way that it's architected, and that it continues to be architected more and more and more as we progress, is to break down applications into the smallest functional unit that you can then weave into a coordination with other functional units and build interfaces for people to use.
You could get so micro, like, for example, I talked about, I don't know, I've been on the internet for a long time, and I have lots of haters, right? Trolls. I even have this. I was having a conversation earlier in the one about, and I was talking about this chick, like 60s, old, ugly, right? Who's been trolling me for 10 years, right? She even finds my family's phone numbers and sends out. And
that's some true dedication.
Yes, but so in this chain, so what I could do, so tell me if I'm wrong. What I could do is I could say, some trolls I kind of like, right? So I only want these trolls to be able to see.
You can actually, yeah, you can. I mean, this is the direction that the internet is moving in general. And what I'm also perceiving from all the communities that I'm a part of that are functional, that are working to serve the needs of their members and building up the agency of their constituent members, they have shifted and are in the process of shifting their orientation from one of pushing people externally into the ways they want them to act to orienting themselves to themselves and enabling the members to be better people. And through that, to then have a pull effect, a gravity effect in a sense, on people who want to become part of those communities because they want to have a better life. And so I think it's a beautiful, beautiful shift of let's figure out, let's experiment with, and let's stabilize how we can live well individually and collectively, and then have the ability to integrate more new, different people.
You gave rise to another question, and I thought we were going to end this soon, but I have one very last question for you.
Please.
I'm going to save that, but and it's pretty a short answer. But for this, so it seems to me, so you're involved. You're very interested and very involved in the crypto, blockchain sort of space. And most everybody's enthusiasm about it, and myself included, I have investments in the big three and about 50 alts, not tons of money, but and I've never sold a thing. I'm just sitting on it, see what happens. But so where do you draw a line? Do you draw a line, and where is it between the enthusiasm of making something that's investing in something that's going to be that potentially can be very valuable to your wildest expectations? I mean, can you imagine if you bought a few Bitcoin in 2009, 2011, right? And a few back in those days, you could buy several hundred for pennies, price of a cup of coffee.
Right.
And people are like, it's crashing. It's $7,000, man. You bought it for 11 cents. So where do you see? How do you see this integrating between the desire to get rich on it, or the desire to get, let me say, life rich? Maybe it enriches your life in other ways besides money.
I think there are, like, any new system, any new way of organizing anything has to have the capacity to distribute energy, lifeblood, currency, whatever it may be, that gives people the capacity to move other people. Has to generate that. And so Bitcoin's beautiful, beautiful role in all of this has been to act as the grandfather that gives rise to hundreds, thousands, and in the eventual case, millions of children that all run experiments and generate newness that can then be selected against. And so Bitcoin was basically this intercontinental ballistic missile that some group or individual genius came up with and directed it at the international financial system that already has been captured by special interests and that has a particular way of functioning. And so they created, or he created, or whoever it was, created this intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM, where every screw was tied on just right, and where every single thing in it is orchestrated in such a way that it can make that one launch and hit the center of the Death Star, right? Like Luke, or like Luke in the
Luke Skywalker.
That's right. And so it is not supposed to be a SpaceX, right? It gave rise to Ethereum. It gave rise to all of these others that were only possible because over time, Bitcoin's capacity to stay secure, regardless of how many people started interacting with it, and was continued to exist. Basically, what Bitcoin has is a certainty anchor.
Yes.
It is something.
It is. That's the thing. It has been built, no matter its price against dollars or whatever currency, whatever physical or fiat currency, it has not been hacked. I mean, the only way to hack Bitcoin is to hack someone who has Bitcoin, right?
That's right.
So
it does so by taking the data integrity thing, taking it from the confines of just one server and replicating it to all servers that participate in the network. And so through that, you make it not computer scientifically impossible to change the data set collectively, but economically and game theoretically very, very costly. And so that's why Bitcoin has been able to provide that one certainty in people's lives that has actually given rise also to sort of religious cultish tendencies that people then malign when they see people acting in defense of Bitcoin, like Bitcoin Maximus, all this stuff. But that's what all cults do. Good.
Hey man, so this was serendipitous. We were just chatting on Messenger, and you said you want to got online, and we got online, and you said, hey, you want to record this, and so you're going to share that recording with me. I'm gonna put it on all my channels for fun. You do so as well. I have one more question for you. You're German, right?
That's right.
Where were you born?
I was born in Hamburg, Germany, so I am a Hamburger.
You're a Hamburger, yeah. I don't know if you knew this. My dad was born in Stettin, which was Germany when he was born there in 1938. Right. Now it's in Poland, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
And my family comes from the east and south, so Prussia and Bavaria, and then also some Nordics. So actually I have some family in the north as well, yeah.
Oh, so you're a Euro mutt. Is that what you're saying?
That's an interesting term, but yeah, you could say that.
Yeah, see, Americans are used to that. Like I have German, Welsh, Scottish, We've grown up with that because my mother's side is like Welsh, Scottish, something like that, Danish maybe. Right, but my dad is German, but I don't know what his mutt pedigree is at all. So
yeah, I can trace them back until the 15th century. But maybe we can talk about more of genetics and all this other stuff in another conversation.
Hey, man,
I definitely have enjoyed this.
This is very cool. So why don't you end it and save that recording, share it to me however you want, and I'm going to put it out there. It's fun. It was amazing.
Out.
Amazing.